All right. Good day, everyone. And thank you for joining today's Ask Me Anything, where we answer your questions about cannabis legalization in New York. We do this every Wednesday at 4:20 p.m. New York City time. I'd like to welcome back those of you who have joined us before. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I hope you will make it a regular occurrence. My name is Jeffrey Hoffman, and I'm an attorney in New York whose legal practice focuses entirely on cannabis. If you would like to contact me, you can do that either here on LinkedIn. I welcome all connection requests, or you're also welcome to connect with me at my email address, which you can see on the screen, info@420jurist.com, which I guess you might say makes me the 420 jurist. And as the 420 jurist, I will be answering your questions, roughly half of them, from a list of questions which I've gotten in previous AMAs, and half from questions which you post in the comments here today. So, if you'd like to ask a question, now is the time to do so. As I do each week, I need to make my standard lawyer disclaimer, and that is that I am an attorney, but I am not your attorney, at least not yet. Though, as always, I do see a few of my clients in the event today. So don't worry, folks. You guys are indeed still my clients. But for the rest of you, I am not your attorney. And today's event is not legal advice. It does not create an attorney-client relationship between us. And it is not a solicitation to offer legal advice. And so, with that disclaimer out of the way, let's get to the questions. And the first question is probably an incredibly popular question, probably top of everybody's mind, and it came in through the comments for today's session. So let's just get right at it. When will the application window open and close for the conditional adult use retail dispensary license? And for those of you who have been living under a rock and are not familiar with the conditional adult use retail dispensary license, which has been all the rage in New York cannabis recently, that license has been approved. That is, the final regulations for that license have been approved by the Cannabis Control Board. They did that at their most recent board meeting. The way this is now going to work is that the OCM is going to post the opening date for the application, and they will post that opening date on their website, and they must do so a minimum of 14 days before the application will open. So it is now Wednesday at 4:23 p.m. I doubt we're going to see anything further from the OCM today. So let's say they did it tomorrow. The earliest the application could open would then be 14 days from tomorrow. Then the application must be open for a minimum of 30 days from the day it opens. So that will give you roughly a little over 4 weeks to submit your application. It will be very interesting to see whether or not they keep that application open longer than those 30 days. My sense is that the goal of the OCM and the CCB is going to be to get as many what they will deem qualified applications through that application window in order to meet their projected number of dispensaries that DASNY is going to be building across the state. And if you just want to run the math, I know a lot of people have thrown out all kinds of different numbers. I think 150 dispensaries is the number that I've heard the most. I tend not to really fixate or anchor on a particular number of dispensaries that DASNY is going to open. I think the number will end up being between 100 and 200. And the way you really get to that number, it's pretty straightforward math. Depending on where you're going to build a dispensary in the state of New York, it's going to cost you somewhere between $600,000 I would say, to $1.2 million for what we would call a normal dispensary. Now, if you look at the documentation that DASNY included with their RFP, they are looking at 3 to 4 to 5,000 square foot dispensaries with all of the bells and whistles that you would expect in a large, fairly sophisticated facility like that. And again, you can look at that document. I posted it to one of my comments in a LinkedIn feed post that I did. So just go look in my feed and you can pick up that document. But so to build out those dispensaries, again, I think the least you're possibly going to be able to do for is around $600,000 to $800,000. Again, for that size, it may be a little more. Again, depending on where you are. Obviously, upstate, where real estate is less expensive and perhaps construction costs are going to be less expensive, you'll be able to do it for the lower end of that range. As you get closer to urban areas, and especially as you get closer to New York City, and then once in New York City, that cost is going to go up and go up perhaps quite substantially. For the dispensaries that I think DASNY is going to be looking to do perhaps in Manhattan and in Brooklyn and some of the areas that are the most expensive real estate that you can find in the state of New York, those locations are going to need to be a little bit bigger and perhaps what you would call significant flagship stores in order to pay back the rent that the justice-involved individuals are going to have to pay on these dispensaries. If you're talking about a Manhattan location or a Brooklyn location where the price of real estate is very expensive, those stores are going to have a tremendous amount of foot traffic and a high number of sales to be profitable. So those stores are going to probably be a little bigger, a little bit more flagship, perhaps, if you want to describe it that way. So those stores could cost more than $1 million. You could even see stores that are going to need to be $2 million or more, depending on what goes on there. So just when you take an average, again, somewhere in the high six figures to the low seven figures for what you would qualify a normal store, and then the special stores here in the New York City area, those are going to kind of be outliers. But for the average for that, let's just call it $1 million. And if you divide that average into the $200 million, which the state has to spend here, and I do get that some of that is going to be on administrativa and other things that DASNY is going to have to do, but just rough back of the envelope math, $1 million average into $200 million is 200 dispensaries. So again, I do think that number somewhere between 100 and 200 makes sense. I do think it's going to depend on how many quality applications that the OCM and the CCB get. And I do think that they will attempt to keep the application open long enough such that they get a sufficient number of applications such that they feel that they will be able to fill all of the DASNY spaces. There is no question that is going to be in DASNY's interest to, as quickly as possible, fill those spaces and get those stores open because the private investors in that $200 million fund are certainly going to want to get a return on their investment. All right, let's go to one of my questions from the backlog. And a question from the backlog. And the question is, isn't this vertical integration? And then the question owner went on to describe the ROs, the registered organizations that are doing medical cannabis in the state. And again, the question is, once those individuals are able to do adult use cannabis, isn't what they're doing vertical integration? And the answer to that is absolutely. It is indeed vertical integration. And one of the ways that the state enticed vendors to apply for the medical cannabis licenses here in the state, which was a significant interest for the state to have, they allowed those, or will allow those entities to be vertically integrated once they allow them to participate in the adult use market. So the ROs and the micro business are the only two license types that will allow complete vertical integration. Again, I will say that I think obviously the ROs are already vertically integrated in their medical cannabis businesses, so it kind of made sense to allow them to continue that model in once they get into the adult use business. And to be clear, it is definitely an advantage to be vertically integrated. It allows you to eat all of the profit margins at every stage of the cannabis value chain. And it also lets you see end to end what is going on in the cannabis market. So if you're a vertically integrated cultivator, you can see what's going on at retail, and you can see what's going on at distribution, and you can see what's going on at processing. You can see the real numbers at that sense. So clearly there is an advantage, and that is an advantage that will accrue to the ROs and to the micro businesses. Now, to be very clear, at the meeting at which Tremaine Wright broke the news about the fact that eventually Tax and Finance will be fining all of the gray market and black, well, not necessarily all, but some of the gray market and black market operators, in particular those that have gotten cease and desist letters. She also broke news that the ROs are not going to just be able to enter the adult use market whenever they want. It is very clear in MRTA that it is entirely up to the Cannabis Control Board as to when the ROs will be able to enter the adult use market. And Tremaine Wright used the line that I am very familiar with her saying, that she and the Cannabis Control Board and the Office of Cannabis Management have a mandate for equity in the market and fulfilling the social and economic equity component of the law, and that there is no question that they're going to allow the law, allow the social and economic equity applicants to flourish before they're going to allow the ROs to participate in the adult use market. So eventually the ROs will be able to be in the adult use market. Eventually they will be able to be fully integrated, and it's simply a matter of when Tremaine Wright and the Cannabis Control Board wants to allow that to happen. So that is the answer to, isn't that vertical integration? The answer is yes, and it is absolutely allowed in MRTA. Now, before I get to some other questions, I do note that a few people have said in the comments that there's perhaps an issue with the sound. I wouldn't mind it if a few other folks wouldn't mind weighing in and let me know if I got another user that says the sound is fine. So the two of you that indicated you had a problem, if you would just check on your ends, and perhaps something has happened on your computers. But it does seem that other folks say, excuse me, that the sound is fine. All right, let's get on to a few other questions. And here's an apropos question related to what we just talked about. Do you have any insight into timelines for fully integrated social equity applicants? Yes, thank you, everyone that's weighing in on the sound. We got it. Thank you. You can stop posting. Thank you. But thank you, though, for weighing in. So back to the question. I'm assuming that what the questioner is asking about is fully vertically integrated social equity applicants. That would be for the micro business license, but we can just talk generally about when we're going to see the application for what I call the standard licenses. Those are the 9 standard licenses that we saw in MRTA, the law that legalized cannabis, and insight into it. So I cannot tell you a day when it will happen. What I can tell you is that I am certain that the OCM and the Cannabis Control Board have been very actively working on this. I do think folks have probably seen the news that their general counsel announced today that he is resigning. So that will certainly impact this timing. That is not good for the timing that we're going to see for this. But once they do propose that regulation, we see the initial regulations, and it's entirely possible that they will roll out those regulations one at a time for each license. So we might see the standard cultivation license first, and then they may take a little time, and then we may see the standard processing license, and so forth and so on. My hope is that they do not do that, but they simply release all 9 regulations at the same time. I'm not going to make any bets on that. I've already lost a bet to Wei Hugh about what they were going to do with the conditional adult use regulation. So he's batting 1,000 and I'm batting 0. I mean, I guess maybe I should do another bet with him about that because I can't do any worse than 0. Although he told me he's not going to take the bat off of his shoulder for the rest of the season. I know a lot of baseball lingo there, but hopefully you folks that follow baseball will know what's going on there. But the timeline that we know once they do release a regulation is as follows. So the regulatory review process in New York requires first that the proposed regulation get published in the state register. The state register comes out once a week. So if you miss the publication deadline, it can be a little over a week before your regulation gets in there. So you can lose some time there. It's then a 60-day public comment window, so a minimum of 60 days for the public to comment on the regulation. And then we get a period where the regulator, that is the Cannabis Control Board and the OCM, get to decide whether or not they want to make any changes to the regulation. And they have as long as they want to do that. For the conditional retail license, they took a little over 45 days. I think it was 46, 47 days, something like that. So that was pretty long. And then if they don't make any changes, they can go right into the application process, much like what you've seen happen now with the conditional dispensary license. If they do want to make changes, it's then another 45-day, what we call a revised rulemaking period, and then they can proceed with doing the application. Now, the bet, in fact, that I lost with Wei was whether or not they would make changes to that retail license. Wei was damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, and I was they can't ignore all of those comments, can they? And the answer ended up being, you betcha, they certainly can ignore all of those comments. I was, as you can imagine, since I bet against it, quite surprised with that. But clearly the CCB has a timeline for those retail dispensaries. They want them open by the end of the year. So Wei was right in his thinking that they were just going to damn the torpedoes and full speed ahead. Now, with these 9 standard licenses, I'm going to go out on the same limb. Maybe I am not once bitten, twice shy on this. I cannot imagine that they're going to do these 9 standard licenses and not do changes based on comments, but I've already been wrong once, so maybe I'll be wrong again. So I think you're going to need the 45 days with those regulations. So when you just do the math, let's call it 15 days, 8 days one time and 7 days the other to get the regulation published in the state register. And then the 45 days and the 60 days plus those 15 days. So that's 120 days right there. 120 days is what? That's 4 months, right? And so that's without any time for the Cannabis Control Board and the OCM to decide what changes they want to make. So that is the minimum amount of time between when they proposed the initial regulation to when we could see the approval of the final regulation and the application opening. So that is assuming they do make changes to each regulation or all the regulations if they do it at one time. So it is a pretty long and involved time scale. If they released the proposed regulations tomorrow, it would seem to me the very earliest that they could possibly open the application would be 4 months from now, which is what? August, September, October, November, somewhere in late November, early December. So right now it looks like that's the earliest that this could all happen. And every day that we don't get the proposed regulations pushes it obviously one day further. So it does look like we're the window is starting to close on a realistic time frame for them to be able to get those regulations approved by the end of 2022. So it does seem like we are starting to look like we're moving into 2023 before any of those things can happen. So really good broad-based question. And I did want to give it a really full answer so folks can kind of get what is going on. All right, let's go over to another question from a previous session. And that question was, would retailers in New York State be able to partner with producers in other regions outside of New England, Mid-Atlantic, like California or Colorado? So if by what you mean by producers is other cultivators or other processors of cannabis products in these other regions, the answer is no. And it's not only you won't be able to do it outside of New England or the Mid-Atlantic, you won't be able to do it outside of New York. So all cannabis in all regulated products in the state of New York must be grown and processed and obviously distributed in the state of New York. You will not be able to go to cultivators in California or Oregon. And I know cultivators in Oregon and Michigan would absolutely love to sell their cannabis elsewhere. Those two states, the pricing is absolutely cratering in those states. And the reason is they can only grow and sell and deal with it in their states. So no, you will not be able to partner with growers or processors from other states. And interestingly enough, a lot of people think that federal prohibition, interstate commerce is really the main reason behind that. And fascinatingly enough, that is not why we have these prohibitions. As far as I'm concerned, look, if the feds were going to do anything, they would just shut down the whole cannabis industry in every state in the country. It has frankly been amazing to me the broad leeway that the federal government has given the states and the state programs in their cannabis program, in the cannabis programs they've implemented. The federal government really has done nothing. And so the real prohibition about interstate commerce of cannabis actually has to do with the laws every state has implemented. And if you look at MRTA, it says in MRTA that you can't bring in cannabis from other states. All the cannabis has to be grown here and processed here, etc. So if some of the states want to start getting creative and start doing compacts between the states and changing each state's laws about not allowing cannabis coming from other states, then you may actually see this happening. Then we'll see whether or not the federal government wants to actually do something about it or not. But the real reason this isn't happening is because of the state laws that prevent cannabis from coming into the state from other states. And for that reason, not only can't you partner with producers outside of New England or the Mid-Atlantic, you can't partner with any producers outside of the state of New York. All right. Let's see if we've got some other good questions in the questions here. All right, here's one. I have heard that Select, and apologies, just a lot of you said I can hear the sound, so obviously not going to answer that question because it's not even a question. I have heard that Select banks are allowing pre-licensing banking for cannabis businesses. Are you able to expand on any regulations? All right, so let's talk about banking a little bit. So the FDIC and all the regulators over banks really don't have a problem with banks doing cannabis. You are absolutely going to have to do your AML and your KYC. And for those of you that don't play acronym buzzword bingo, that is anti-money laundering and know your customer. Those are probably the two most important acronyms for a bank in any type of regulation. So banks are saying as long as you are incredibly strict about your regulation, about your AML and your KYC, go for it. Bank cannabis businesses. And in fact, there are a number of cannabis banks all over the country that are doing this. You're also seeing some other businesses that are very creative in what they're doing. Generally, the banks that you're seeing that are banking cannabis businesses are smaller banks. You are not seeing the Chases or the Citibanks of the world banking cannabis. You are starting to see some of the what I would consider mid-level banks starting to bank cannabis. But for the smaller banks, they're usually, while they're interested in banking cannabis, they are not able to offer all of the services that a traditional banking customer would want. That's why you're seeing services like Abaca or Dama enter the market. They're kind of a third party that are helping with the AML and the KYC, and they are also adding the services to help the smaller banks offer better online banking and better services to the cannabis businesses so that they can get that banking. I do wish that our Congress would get with the program and just frankly deschedule cannabis. If my buddy Bruce is listening, I know that's one of his big things, and he's going to be doing a lot of things related to encouraging the federal government to descheduleize. Bruce, I'll see you later tonight. For those of you that might be attending or interested, there's a Cannabis Industry Association event up in Dobbs Ferry tonight, so would welcome seeing any of all of you that want to go there tonight. At the event, 6:30, literally right at the train station there up in Dobbs Ferry. I know Bruce would love to have all of you there. He's big in that organization. But so he's real interested in getting cannabis deschedulized, if that's a verb. And I would love it if the government would do that, because that would address all kinds of problems. We could get all of the federal cannabis, all the folks that are federally incarcerated for cannabis offenses out of jail. Banking would no longer be a problem. All kinds of great things could happen. 280E would go away. But until we do it, you are going to need to work with these banks that have seen the light and are willing to do the extra work that's necessary to bank cannabis. But there are absolutely banks that will do it. There are other service providers that can help you with that, and get on it if you're a cannabis business. There's no reason for you to not have a bank account at this point. And yes, Nikki Lawley, my buddy, the queen of medical cannabis in the state of New York. So she absolutely has some great information. The credit unions are another great place to do that. She mentions that she heard Bank of America is doing this. I have not seen that yet, but if she has information to that extent, I would welcome her sharing that in the comments here, because Bank of America, I know, is very important there. Mr. Ortiz notes that banking isn't as much of an issue as payment processing. So with the organizations that I have spoken with and dealt with, you can do debit card processing with them. It's just that you can't do credit card processing. And until Visa and MasterCard and their partners that control those gateways get more comfortable with it and let it happen, you're just not going to see Visa and MasterCard accepted as a credit card. But it does appear that debit cards are allowed. Now, I'm not talking about the cashless ATMs, which is fraud. And I would encourage anybody that is doing that to think twice about it, because it is fraud. Visa and MasterCard have made that clear. So I am not talking about the cashless transactions at ATMs. I am talking about actually using your ATM at a terminal. So these are ways that you can go about doing it. And it sounds like Joseph Ortiz knows a good bit about this. So you may want to reach out to him and see what other information he has about that. All right. I'm going to do one more quick question, and then I think we're going to wrap for the day. And that is, with being a micro, and that would, I imagine, being a micro licensee, if and when people get that license, do you need to apply for all these licenses? And what they're referring to is all of the, since the micro business can be fully vertically integrated, do you need to get one of each of the types of licenses, or do you get the vertical benefit all under the micro license? And I'm going to answer this real quickly because it's a pretty straightforward question. And that is, they get all of those benefits under the micro license itself. There is no need to apply for any other licenses. In fact, when you get the micro license, you are not allowed to get any other licenses. And so once you get that single license, the micro business license, you are absolutely allowed to be doing all of those things. Again, just like the ROs, once they get into adult use, the micro business licensee will be able to be fully vertically integrated. And so at that point, I am going to do one more question. Actually, no, forget it. We're going to hold that question over till next time. It has to do with upstream licenses and downstream licenses and what I call semi-verticalization. But if you're interested in that, come back next time and we'll answer it next time. All right. So thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your attendance. Like I said, I'm going to be at the cannabis event up in Dobbs Ferry tonight. Would welcome the opportunity to see any of you there. We're going to do this again next Wednesday at 4:20. We do it every Wednesday at 4:20, so put it on your calendar. If you are not currently a connection of mine on LinkedIn, please send me a connection request. Would love to do it. And finally, as I've said, while I love this cannabis industry, this regulated cannabis industry, because we know we've had a cannabis industry in New York for as long as I've been alive, but the regulated cannabis industry is, we're on the brink of having one. But for me, the most important thing that got done in MRTA is that cannabis is no longer illegal. We're no longer going to arrest people for cannabis. We are going to expunge most of the low-level cannabis offenses. If you have a higher level cannabis offense, you can file a 440 motion, thank you, and get your conviction expunged where DAs don't oppose it. And where DAs oppose it, we are going to fight them. So be looking on the next several weeks and months. I'm going to be coming out with a number of justice initiatives that we are going to be pursuing with a university, perhaps, here in New York City that some of you have heard of, with a number of state senators that some of you may have heard of, and a variety of other individuals, maybe a celebrity or two. We are very serious about these justice issues, and we are going to get this stuff done. So, thank you, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a good one.